I used to be that awkward Asian girl at BuzzFeed, and now I'm blonde. And this is that story. That's dumb. I'm a man now. That's why I'm here.
Ashley, I made it. What's up, girl? Yeah, everybody could hear you down the street. You're very loud.
If you clicked on this video, you probably recognize my face. Maybe you're like, wait, did that girl from BuzzFeed have a brother? It's me. I'm the brother. You may have missed a few chapters, but let's get into it. So I grew up in Escondido, California, and I grew up very, very conservative, super Christian, went to a school where my graduating class was 19 people. And I just remember thinking my life was going to be so small growing up. Unfortunately, for me, I always knew I was gay. My childhood was marked by dealing with a secret from the very, very beginning of not being able to be who I was. And I was like, this is going to be a rough life. I went from a very conservative Christian background to a conservative Christian college. I went to Pepperdine. I was a sorority girl, Delta Gamma. And then from there, I moved to South Korea to teach English because I was so lost. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And during that time is when BuzzFeed started blowing up. Someone said that in order to get hired at BuzzFeed, you have to write for their community tabs. BuzzFeed had this community tab. Anyone could sign up and you could write BuzzFeed articles. And if they went viral, you might get hired. So I wrote one and it got like 3,000 views, which was crazy to me. To have 3,000 people read something, I was like, oh great, they're gonna call me tomorrow. I must have gone viral. That didn't happen. I wrote another post for the BuzzFeed community post while I was in Korea called What It's Like to Be a Girl, as told by girls, mean girls, and bridesmaids. Could this be a more millennial story? And I went from like, you've gotten 500 views to you've got 1,000 to overnight having over 1 million views. In my whole bank of emails telling me that I had gone viral, I also had a job offer from BuzzFeed. And that's how I ended up at BuzzFeed New York in 2013 as a 23-year-old with a dream. I eventually moved out to BuzzFeed LA and got my job at video on accident. I was just being my loud self, and Zay Frank, who was the president of BuzzFeed Video at that point, said, hey, you're loud. You should be in videos. Then I was in a few taste tests and people liked me or gravitated towards me. They were like, hey, that awkward Asian girl's funny. I made a video called If Your Phone Was Your Boyfriend with Andrew Gautier and Ella Mielnyshenko. He was very handsome. I didn't know why he needed to be so handsome. And I think that led to the whole dynamic of me being awkward because I didn't know how to be anything in front of this model man except for awkward. It did really well, but at that point, BuzzFeed Video was not really scripted content. And so we realized like we have to create a new ecosystem for this scripted content. And so we came up with BuzzFeed Violet, which would be female-centric scripted content that's identity-based. And then it kind of just exploded in this way that we did not ever anticipate happening. And my whole life changed from that point.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna go this. So you go. Okay, bye.
We were releasing 1 to 2 videos a week. We started to need to bring new producers on because we couldn't produce fast enough. We went pretty quickly, I think, to like a couple million subs on the channel. And with each video, more and more people were relating to me as a person, which was both an honor and terrifying. So at that same moment that YouTube was taking off in the way that it was, Instagram was taking off, which meant that people were watching our YouTube videos and then following us personally on Instagram. I remember going from like, I don't know, 30, 40,000 followers to 700,000 within a couple of months. It had been my dream for so long to get in front of camera and get famous and be an actor. And when it actually happened, it was in this kind of semi-confusing way of I was acting, but I was using my real name and my character's name was Ashley. And very quickly, my character got shipped with another one of my coworkers named Andrew, who was in a real relationship, but we both had personas on BuzzFeed. So Andrew was the weird guy and I was the awkward girl, and there was like natural chemistry on screen, it kind of just kept building and snowballing until it became something called Astru, the ship name for me and Andrew. And it was big. Like, it was part of our thesis of why BuzzFeed Violet was working, because no matter what videos we did, we would always try and keep this continuing thread of a story. And Astru, you know, like a sitcom, a classic will they, won't they, keeps you watching through all the episodes. So, you know, we did an Astru episode that was what it's like when you're sick, that has millions of views, because in it, I have a fever dream about Andrew. And so in order to stay in on the whole BuzzFeed Violet lore and to keep up with this ship, you had to watch all these videos. So everything was going according to plan, except for that inside, I was 24-year-old who was starting to feel the dissonance of not actually being who I was inside. I knew that I mainly liked women. It's not that I didn't like men, but it was like a 90-10 split. So what the It helped with the awkwardness, I'll say that. That was definitely coming out on camera, but it all kind of culminated or crashed with Astru getting a little too big and getting to the point where people were expecting us to kiss. The T is just that it was confusing for us too, because it's not what we signed up for. And it was such a mind because I knew I was gay, and I was starting to feel what I now know is gender dysphoria. Underneath all of that, I didn't really know who I was at that point. You know, when we did the You Do You series, I remember when we started doing makeup tests for my character, it was so femme and I hated it. And I remember having to tell the makeup artist, like, I can't have my hair like this. It doesn't feel like me. You'll see in the first season, even of, unfortunately, Ashley, from the first season to the second season, you can very much see how my costumes become more masculine. I mean, still femme, but much more masculine than wearing dresses or bright colors. And I now know that that was all gender dysphoria. But I'm doing it in front of millions of people as I'm starting to get recognized, and people are starting to come up to me and say that they feel represented as an Asian girl, as an awkward Asian girl, as a loud Asian girl, an Asian girl who can find love. And it kind of felt like a lie because I wasn't even really doing that. I was in a fake relationship with my coworker who was in a real relationship, and I hadn't come out yet. So it really started to feel like it was time to come out. Violet had become a big thing. Astru had become a big thing. Everyone was shipping me and Andrew, waiting for us to have our big kiss. I think viewers thought that we were trying to pull the rug out from under them because somebody decided my character should be gay, but really it was just me being like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And so we kind of quickly decided to make it a part of You Do You that my character comes out as bisexual. So I had my first kiss with a girl on camera, and that was with Lindsay Hicks, which in some ways was a relief and also terrifying. It was a relief to know that I didn't have to keep pretending to be this person, and I started experimenting now that I was out. It felt better at least having gotten that part of me out online, so it felt like I could still keep exploring what was happening in my life concurrently. It's almost impossible to split up my work from who I was and what my journey was at that point. All of those years at BuzzFeed, everything that you saw, if you related to it, you were relating to us, which is crazy. I remember feeling that I couldn't see myself being gay in real life until I saw it on BuzzFeed Violet. We had a premiere for You Do You, and I watched myself coming out, and I watched Quinta's character accepting me, and Ella and Sarah accepting me, and it helped me accept myself in real life. They always say that representation is so important because it allows us to dream of who we want to be. It was a weird moment because I was the representation of myself that I needed to see. Like, that's actually the biggest honor of anything that I've ever done, that anything I've ever made somebody feel brave enough to be themselves. I I think that was what was so special about BuzzFeed, is that we got to be fully ourselves. So You Do You was this big pivotal moment. It was the first time that we had released a scripted series on BuzzFeed. So we released it on iTunes. We beat the Kardashians. We beat Fargo. I remember just being like completely shocked that that was a thing. From there, the rest of my time at BuzzFeed was really focused on making scripted content. So we made You Do You, You Do Too, then we made Unfortunately Ashley, and we made Unfortunately Ashley Season 2. And if you watch the progression of those, you can see me becoming more and more comfortable being myself. You know, I had more female love interests on screen and in real life. I was starting to feel like myself. When I left BuzzFeed, I had been in 4 scripted shows that I was the star of or one of the main casts for, and then I left and was completely behind camera. I was making my way through this traditional world and feeling like, oh, I have this new exciting place to explore. There was something about having that real job in television that made me feel like an actual writer. But it was a weird transition, going from being in front of the camera to being behind the camera. You know, as a staff writer, you have a very specific role just in the writer's room. You're not even necessarily supposed to talk that much in the writer's room. And I found actually that as I gained success as a writer in television, I started to lose my voice. I started to feel like I didn't know what stories I was telling anymore. The most I would get is maybe a joke in an episode of something, or, you know, even a whole storyline. In Good Trouble, actually, Alice, the character who's an Asian lesbian, she has a dance episode where she learns to be sexy by dancing, which was one of my most viral videos at BuzzFeed. And so there were these direct moments where parts of my story were getting onto scripted television, but it started to not feel like me because it would go through so many layers, through the network, through the showrunner, through the writer's room, through all these notes. And I found myself feeling very isolated because of COVID, but also isolated because I had let go of this connection with a community that I had built. And I felt like I didn't quite know how to process what was going on in my life. The last 5 years, from 2020 to 2025, feels like a minute and a lifetime. And it turned out to be a global, world-changing event that not only changed the world we lived in, but changed my world because my dad died. I had finally got my dream job of writing comedy, and my life had become a tragedy. And I was having to write jokes about family and parent dynamics. And I got to a point where I had a mental breakdown and I was not able to continue working. It was in that mental breakdown that I started to realize a lot. It took the whole world to stop for me to process what the had just happened to me. I think, like for many of us, the pandemic allowed us to reflect and think in a way that we hadn't before, especially people who were front-facing or on the internet. It kind of stripped away all of this illusion of everything. And having that break is actually what allowed me to realize that I was trans and to start my transition to becoming a man quietly and privately, which was a big gift. So my gender transition started when my dad died, and I had this desire to cut my hair. So I cut my hair. Then I started dressing more masculine, but I still didn't really feel like myself. Went to a gender therapist who told me that you seem to be presenting more trans masc. Is there a reason you're not like following that? And this was actually, I saw my gender therapist right before I was gonna get my top surgery. So I knew that I didn't want my boobs. I was getting my top surgery, but I still didn't know what my gender was. So that's how confusing all of this stuff is. Like, you can know one thing but not know something else that seems very obvious now looking back. I had already come out on the internet, and to come out from being a woman to a man felt like drama. So I was like, maybe I'm just like non-binary, and maybe I'm everything, and maybe I'm, but that wasn't the truth either. And then I realized I didn't want to be a masculine woman. I wanted to be a girly man. I wanted to be Harry Styles. Who didn't want to be Harry Styles? When I was ready to start sharing again my life, partially because of the grief that I was going through, I needed community to get through these hard moments in my life. My dad died. I got married. I got divorced. I realized I was trans. I came out as trans. The whole industry collapsed with writers' strikes. And then LA literally caught on fire. And I was kind of like, who am I? All right, y'all. You've stuck with me this far. Now you're going to get the reward. The good part is coming, the happy stuff. And it starts with getting hot pot with Zach Kornfeld. Our friendship goes back a long time. We've been friends for over a decade. We were actually married at BuzzFeed. So Zach and I sat down to just get a catch up. I don't know, it very quickly turned into a brainstorming session, which is what happened at BuzzFeed all the time. He asked about my transition, and I think he was expecting me to say that it was really hard or difficult or sad or something, you know, all the narratives we hear about transness. And instead I was like, it's so funny, Zach. Like, I am in this whole new world and I have all these funny stories and insights about what it's like to be a man from having been the awkward girl on the internet, and I have nowhere to put it. And I was telling him these stories, he was laughing, and he was like, dude, I feel like this is a show. He greenlit it right there and then over Hot Pot, which is insane because I had just worked in an industry for like 10 years where things move at a glacial pace. They don't get greenlit without thousands of notes. And here was my friend being like, let's do it. And getting the chance to be back on the internet on my terms as a try guy, crazy, was just so beautiful because unlike the traditional system, I was allowed to be me and do me. Zach and Keith gave me carte blanche, basically, of like, you know how to make videos, make it however you want. And it just felt like the only way I ever could have come back to the internet. I started on the internet as 23-year-old who had no idea who I was or what I was doing, got famous by accident. And now I'm back as a 36-year-old man on the internet. I know who I am, and now I'm sharing with you who I am and know that my story gets to continue, but I get to tell it the way that I want fully as an adult. So I get to say goodbye to the awkward girl, and I get to step into the future where I'm a badass hunky dude, and I get to be an author, a writer, a creator, whatever I want to be. And that's the exciting part. And the story's not done. It's still going. And if you're like, whoa, Ash is back and I want more. Well, guess what? I have an audiobook coming out, a rom-com, a queer rom-com called Speak Now. It comes out on March 31st, 2026, and it is gay and it's amazing. And please, please, please listen to it. Okay, bye.